Hello and welcome. My name is Pathan Anthibia, and I'm delighted to be with you today facilitating this plenary session on women on the front line of COVID-19. We will have an hour and a half to discuss with our panelists and also about this topic. We will have a poll for the audience around our main topic, women on the front line of COVID-19. I would like to welcome all of you and ask you to please participate and share your valuable ideas and comments to this interactive dialogue through our different platforms, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, and use our hashtag #WomenForMediterranean. Please also download the conference app for an enhanced conference experience. Create a personalized conference agenda, use our matchmaking tool to network according to your interests, and ask questions to speakers and respond to surveys and polls, all while following the live session in full screen format. As I'm presenting this panel, we are still in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic, and in most parts of the world, countries are applying again the lockdown policy in order to contain the curve of the disease. So why is it important, this topic and today's dialogue? We already have plenty of information of the COVID-19 crisis and how it will deepen already existing inequalities, especially for women and girls. Nevertheless, women have a predominant position fighting against the pandemic at all levels. Women account for 70% of the health and social care workforce. Still, they are underrepresented in leadership and decision-making positions. Women health workers are also regularly subjected to abuse and harassment by colleagues and patients, a situation that has become worse with the COVID-19. While women were already doing most of the work and paid care work prior to the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, the crisis and its subsequent shutdown response have resulted in a dramatic increase in this burden. We have today a panel full of brilliant and inspiring women to talk about these challenges, opportunities, and way of bringing women to the decision-making process as a tool for enhancing resilience in times of COVID-19. But first, allow me to introduce the poll to the audience. You can answer the poll question on the bottom right of the session page and also on the app. You might need to refresh the page. You will have 30 seconds to reply. So the question to the audience is, considering that women are 70% of the global health workforce, what percentage of the workforce do women represent in senior roles? 50%, 25%, or 5%? Please, let's start voting. And also do write your questions and comments through our different platforms, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook, and use our hashtag #WomenForMediterranean. And the answer is 25% women are represented in senior roles. Allow me now to introduce you our two first panelists. Mrs. Fatma Sayin is the mayor of Gaziantep in Turkey. She is an engineer and a politician, and she is the former Minister of Family and Social Policies in Turkey. Welcome, Mr. Sayin. And Mrs. Haifa Fahum Al-Kilani, founder and chairman of the Arab International Women's Forum, is a development economist with focus on diversity, inclusion, and economic security. She's a fellow of the Arab Advanced Leadership Initiative and served as the only Arab commissioner on the ILO Global Commission on the Future of Work. Welcome, Mrs. Al-Kilani. I will be opening today's discussion with two main questions for them. Please, you will have no more than 10 minutes to answer so we can the interactive dialogue with the audience. Mrs. Sayin, how can we ensure women's leadership as well as their equal representation in decision-making positions in managing the COVID-19 pandemic?
Yönetmede karar alma pozisyonlarında liderliklerini eşit temsil edilmesini nasıl sağlayabilir?
And for Mrs. Al-Kilani, what can we do to encourage women's voices and their participation in the decision-making process at the local level for a better management of the pandemic? Thank you.
Ben öncelikle UfM Women'ın değerli başkanını, değerli katılımcıları, kıymetli hanımefendileri sevgiyle, saygıyla, hürmetle selamlıyorum.
I primarily would like to salute the president, the chair of UfM Women, the co-participants, and the audience.
Öncelikle Gaziantep 2 milyon nüfusu var ama 500 bin mülteciyle birlikte 7 yıldan beri yaşıyoruz. 500 bin mültecinin %80'i de kadın ve çocuk.
As you know, as Gaziantep, we have a population of 2 million. However, we have an extra of 500,000 refugees, and about 70 to 80% of them are women.
Küresel bir sorunla karşı karşıyayız. Ulusal bir mücadelemiz var. Ama en önemli şey yerel uygulamalar. Çözüm yerel uygulamalarda.
Of course, we are facing a global problem, and on the national level, we are fighting against it. But as we all know, what is most important and most significant is the local responses.
Güçlü bir sağlık altyapınız, güçlü bir sosyal güvenlik altyapınız olmazsa bu büyük sorunun altından kalkmanız mümkün değil.
If you do not have a strong health infrastructure, a social infrastructure, it is almost impossible to overcome this issue.
Özellikle kadın bakış açısıyla, kadın duygusal zekasıyla, kadının empati gücüyle, kadının disipliniyle çözülmesi gereken bir sorunla karşı karşıyayız.
We are facing a problem that should be solved with the specific, with especially from the women's perspective, from the emotional part of women, from the empathy concept of women and the women's strategy.
Bilim kurulundan çıkan raporlarda temizliğin ne kadar önemli olduğunu görür görmez hemen Gaziantep'in bütün mahallelerine, özellikle ekonomik olarak daha zayıf olan mahallelerine temizlik malzemeleri hızlı bir şekilde dağıttık.
After reviewing the report that was published by our Science Council, we have seen how important it is to be clean and to clean. So what we have implemented as first on the local level of Gaziantep is cleaning projects, especially on the economically challenged neighborhoods.
En önemli şey çocukları korumamız gerekiyordu. Anneleri ve kadınları bilgilendirmemiz gerekiyordu.
Of course, what was most important is protecting the child and protecting the women and mothers and informing them.
15 günde 15 milyon maske hazırlayıp herkesin evine tek tek maskelerini ulaştırdık.
And within 15 days we have prepared 15 million masks and we have delivered them to homes.
Maske, mesafe ve temizliğin bu pandemide en büyük koruyucu önleyici tedbir olduğunu halkımıza anlatmak için her türlü yöntemi kullandık.
And we have implemented various awareness raising activities in order to emphasize the key structure, which is the mask, distance and cleaning.
Özellikle akıllı şehir olmanın altyapısı bu dönemde çok önemliydi. İnsanlar evlerinde kaldığı zaman çocuğun, kadının yaşamını zayıflatmadan haneyi mutlu edecek evde hayat var programını başlattık.
Of course, being a smart city has a lot of impact on our struggle as well. When people stayed at home, in order to prevent the women to become further vulnerable, we have commenced certain programs, certain digital programs.
Belediyenin yaptığı bütün kültürel programları, bütün sanat programlarını, çocuklara dair kütüphane hizmetlerini hepsini dijitalleştirdik ve evde kullanabilecekleri hale dönüştürdük.
We have digitalized all of the municipal services, including the cultural and virtual services, as well as the kids library.
Ailece sporla başlayan gün akşam çocuklarımıza masal okutarak tamamladık.
So we have commenced the day with the family sport, and we have ended the day with telling fairy tales to our kids.
Kontrollü sosyal hayatın ne anlama geldiğini ve bu konuda herkesin yaşam şeklini, yaşam önceliklerini değiştirmeleri gerektiğini toplumun her kesimine anlattık.
We have we have comprehended the concept of controlled social life, and we have changed our priorities accordingly.
Çocuklarımızın okula başlama kararı alınınca da okullarımızı temiz okul, güvenli okul hale dönüştürmek için maske, dağıtımı, dezenfekte, sıvı sabun, her türlü desteği dezenfekte araçlarından sosyal mesafe stikerlerine kadar bir okulun temiz ve güvenli olacağı bütün altyapıyı büyükşehir olarak biz temin ettik.
Of course, when the national decision which emphasized the reopening of schools was the case, we have implemented a series of different services, including the distributions of masks, disinfectants, and soaps in schools, as well as placing the disinfectant vehicles near schools and distributing many stickers about the social distance.
Ben okuyorum, Gaziantep okuyor kampanyasında çocukların hepsine kapı kapı kitap dağıttık.
And we have distributed many books with the project that is called Ben Okuyorum, Gaziantep Okuyor, which can be translated as I am reading and the Gaziantep is reading.
Dijital kütüphanemizi kurduk. Milyonlarca kitaba dijital ortamda ulaşmalarını sağladık.
We have established our digital library and made it accessible to the public.
Hayatı normalleştirip pandemiden sonraki kurulacak yeni dünyaya hazırlık yaptık.
We tried to normalize life, and we tried to make our public be prepared for the after pandemic normal.
Özellikle gıda güvenliğinin, tedarik zincirinin ne kadar önemli olduğunu gördük ve toprak ve tarımdan başlayarak kadınların kooperatifleşmesini, örgütlenmesini ve buradaki ürünleri satacağı dijital marketing altyapısını oluşturduk.
We have seen how important it is the nourishment and food safety and security. We understood how important it was, the supply chain. So commencing from the agriculture itself, we have tried to help our women become more collaborative and cooperative among each other. And we try to establish different digital marketing series for them.
Aile ekonomisi çok önemli, şehir ekonomisi çok önemli. Özellikle orta ve alt grubun buradan daha fazla etkilenmemesini önlemek için kadın merkezli, toprak alanları, toprak merkezli, tarım merkezli projeleri hayata geçirdik.
Of course, the family economy is very important. The urban economy is very significant. So in order to preserve especially the economic stability and standards of the middle and the lower ground of the economic community, we have established a series of women-centered implementations and projects.
Yeşil ekonomi başlığıyla toprağı, suyu, havayı koruyacak bir ekosistem, küresel ısınma ve çevre projelerini güçlendirdik.
We have further reinforced and consolidated the environmental projects within the scope of green economy, which are intended to protect, preserve the soil, the water, and of course the air, as well as fighting the global climate change.
Her yıl 1 milyon ağaç dikme kampanyası Yeşil Gaziantep projesini başlattık.
We have commenced the Green Gaziantep project, which intends to plant about 1 million trees per year.
Bunu gelir getirici hale dönüştürdük.
We have economized it and we have made it profitable.
fıstık, badem gibi ağaçları ektik ve köylülere teslim ettik.
We have, in accordance with this, we have planted the pistachio trees and we have basically given them to our villagers.
Vücudun bağışıklık sistemini geliştirecek, özellikle sumak, nar ekşisi gibi bilim dünyasının onayladığı sistemde kadınlarımızın kooperatiflerini kurdurduk.
We have implemented many women cooperatives and collaborations which are focusing on producing the spices and sauces which are by science are proved to be further strengthening reinforcing the immunity system of individuals.
Kendi yoğurdumuzu üretiyoruz, kendi peynirimizi üretiyoruz.
We are right now, in accordance with this, we are right now producing our own yogurt.
Kendi narımızı ve kendi sumağımızı üretiyoruz.
As the spices and sauces.
Bilim dünyası burada vücudun bağışıklık sistemi için baharatları çok önemli diyor. Sarımsağımızı, soğanımızı üretiyoruz.
The science community is dictating that these spices are very important for preserving the immune system. So we are producing our own garlic and our own onions.
Bunu kadınlara ürettiriyoruz.
And the producers are majorly women.
Dijital marketle de bütün dünyaya satıyoruz.
Through digital marketing, we are selling all abroad the globe.
Eğer şehir ekonomisini güçlü tutmazsak bu sağlık salgını ekonomiyi vuruyor ve kadınlara en çok vuruyor ve bu belli bir süre sonra da yöneticilerin bu işi başaramadığı yönünde bir kanaat oluşturuyor. O yüzden kadın bakış açısıyla, kadın liderliğiyle, kadınlar için kadınlarla birlikte bu yola gittiğimizde birlikte yeneceğiz, birlikte başaracağız.
Of course, if you cannot stabilize the urban economy, then the local as well as the national economy goes down, which impacts the women's economy mostly, which later on turns into bad leadership. And in order to avoid such occurrences with our women, we have established many collaborations in order to protect their economic stability. And we can see that we are being successful on that matter.
Kadınsız kalkınma olmaz, kadınsız demokrasi olmaz. Kalkınma yerelde başlar, demokrasi yerelde başlar diyorum.
Without women, there cannot be any development. Without women, there cannot be any democracy. And the commencement point of democracy as well as the development is the local.
Çok teşekkür ediyorum.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Sayin. Now I will ask Mrs. Elkiani. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Paz. It's such a pleasure for me personally and as founder chairman of the Arab International Women's Forum to join this distinguished panel today at the UfM Women for the Mediterranean Conference. In order to answer this question, I would like to start with a quotation that is very pertinent from UN Women on the subject. And I quote, "Many of the key decision makers in the process of designing and executing the pandemic response are men. This is because women in the MENA and many other regions still do not enjoy the same degree of participation in major decision-making bodies, governments, parliaments, cabinets, or corporations, as men do. Gender concerns are not yet shaping the decisions that mainly male leaders are making." End of quote. So we need key strategies and policy measures to ensure women's leadership and women's inclusion at all levels of the society to manage COVID as well as to build back better after COVID. Allow me to list some of the measures that are for women in the community, and then I will come to specific measures to women at local communities. Number one, of course, empowering civil society. We are very proud in the MENA region that we have witnessed in the last 15 years almost 2 decades, a vibrant space. And women are at the heart of civil society in the MENA region. We have a vibrant civic space, and women are at the heart of being engaged with civil society in the MENA region in almost every country. We are very proud to see this, and this is very important. We must encourage more and more women's participation in civil society, because this is a space where women are able to put forth their voices. Importantly, we need to empower more women in public life and in parliaments. We have seen a lot, again, of advancements in the MENA region the last 2 decades. We've seen more women joining parliaments. We've seen more women being appointed to cabinets, appointed to shura councils. We've seen more women appointed as judges and ambassadors. So we've seen an amazing amount, a number of women joining the public sphere, but the figures are still very low. Participation for women in parliaments in the MENA region is close to 18%. So we need to enhance women's public voice, and parliaments are the places where key legislations are made that impact everybody's lives in the community. We need to empower women more in the private sector and support women's entrepreneurship, because we believe when women prosper, families and communities also prosper. This is extremely important. And while we have seen, again, we are proud of the progress that has been achieved, but it is not enough yet. We have seen many women join private sector and set up their own businesses and join corporations and take amazing professions in all aspects of our business sectors. But when we look at the participation of women in the workforce in the MENA region, it remains amongst the lowest, if not the lowest, in the world at 20%. So we need to empower and encourage more women in business. And when we look at the pandemic, not only in the MENA, globally, women's businesses were the most impacted and adversely impacted by the pandemic, because women work in sectors traditionally, services, textiles, and hospitality, that were very, very badly and adversely affected by the pandemic. So we need support women, because we know when women are financially secure, their families, their communities are financially secure. We need to support entrepreneurship, and we need to support women in setting up their SMEs as well as their micro businesses. They create jobs for others, but importantly, they also invest their funds in building a better family atmosphere, sphere for their children, as well as they participate in their participation in the economy is vital. In order, of course, education remains extremely important. And we have all been, with the pandemic, being really put immediately into the future by using more and more technology. Look at us now, 7 months down the line from when the pandemic started, how much we have all learned and use more technology. And we need women also to be empowered and engaged in that knowledge, so that they can be effective and they can really delivering at all levels more. So we need to bridge the digital divide and invest in skills and in learning opportunities for women. We need also an urgent need for gender-based data to fully understand how women and men are being impacted by the pandemic. But also we need it in terms of the social impact of the pandemic, the care work, the domestic violence, career interruptions, all these things that have impacted women more than men. Effectively promoting gender equity and leadership will require taking a more nuanced approach to data collection. In order for this to happen, we need all stakeholders to work together. We need the government, we need the private sector, civil society, universities, everybody working hand in hand in order to empower women, support women, and build that important human capital, 50% of the human capital that we have in the region and worldwide, to not only face and manage the horrible effects of the pandemic, but to help build a better future for their communities and for the society at large. If we look at how to support women at the local level more, this is very important because in order to encourage women's voices and participation at local level, with the aim of achieving a better management of COVID, there is need to think of a holistic approach that would not only include immediate measures, but also long-term measures that could be introduced progressively to ensure that COVID-19 does not reverse the progress already achieved by women. For example, there's an urgent need to invest in actions that help in amplifying the voice of grassroots women in local decision-making through encouraging their personal and collective advocacy capacities and self-esteem. Here, training is very important, and different stakeholders should put in efforts to train women to become actively engaged in addressing all key issues and actively engaged in being able to join public bodies addressing COVID and other important local issues. Designing effective advocacy is particularly important for changing negative perceptions about women's participation in decision-making and leadership at the local level. We need to encourage women's participation in the local media and the newspapers. Their voices must be heard, and they heard also through the media because that will also give them a wider amplification for their concerns as well as for sharing their thoughts on the issues in hand. There is a need for more dialogue forums, especially at the community level, and information education materials to promote the role of women in leadership and decision-making processes. Adopting a gender lens to decision-making and participation should be systematic. For example, to address gender-based violence, which has been on the rise since the pandemic outbreak, it's crucial to create local safe spaces for women to report abuse and designate shelters for their protection. NGOs' interventions with the most vulnerable should build on localized women alternatives, addressing their specific needs and lives experiences, covering better access to information and basic services, physiosocial support, and livelihood opportunities. We must also ensure an inclusive public-private dialogue so that women can voice their concerns and priorities when public policy reforms are being envisaged. When we talk about local women, we must not forget rural women. Women are the backbone of agriculture, and they provide for our food security. What are the ways to ensure gender-sensitive policies in the wake of COVID-19, particularly for women in the rural economies? And I'm going just to, for the sake of time, just to run through them. We need to ensure women's access to information and participation in data collection. Ensure female farmers have access to markets and agricultural resources, because with the pandemic, markets have closed, and if they're not able to sell their produce, their incomes, their incomes are low, they will lose income, and they themselves and their families will become very badly impacted. We need to build rural women's resilience to future shocks. We need to expand rural women's access to social assistance. And again, we need to go back to the question of domestic violence and adopt measures to prevent domestic violence against women. Women's rights and empowerment must be a key element of the pandemic response and long-term resilience. And I would like to conclude by recommending that, similar to Resolution 1325 on women in peace building, the UN must and should adopt a UN resolution that will address women in the fight against COVID and in the recovery post-COVID. This pandemic is going to be with us for some years to come, and women's role now and in the future is absolutely crucial. And a UN resolution similar to Resolution 1325 to address specifically women's role in the fight against COVID and in the recovery that all governments will sign for will put women at the heart of public policy on this matter and all other matters, and will involve all women in the community, whether they are at this grassroots or at all levels of the society. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you. Thank you, Mrs. El-Kilani. Many key ideas, including empowering women in parliaments and enhance women's voice and power. Thank you so much for your ideas. So now we will continue the discussion with our next three panelists. But first, allow me to ask my second poll question to the audience. You can answer, as before, the poll question on the bottom right of the session page and also on the app. You may need to refresh the page. The question to the audience is, what will be your estimate of how much money women's unpaid work is in the health and social sector represents at global level? 1.3 trillion, 6.5 million, 1.2 billion. You will have 1 minute to reply. Please, let's start the voting. And also I invite all of you to share ideas and participate in the question and answer later on for 5 panelists. Brilliant ideas are coming and going. Do write your questions through our different platforms, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook. And use, of course, our hashtag Women for the Mediterranean. So I don't know if we have the poll yet, Kate, or that's it, that's a poll. So the answer is half of the work done by women in the health and social sector is unpaid, 1.3 trillion per year. That gives us the magnitude of the economic impact of this topic. Allow me now to introduce Mrs. Mari Kawa. She's the former Minister for Planning and International Cooperation in Jordan. She was the director of the International Labour Organization in East Africa with more than 30 years experience in government and international development. Welcome, Mrs. Kawa. Dr. Karen Euro is board member of the International Council of Nurses and the European Forum of Nurses and Midwives, and she's former Vice President of the Norwegian Nurses Organization. Welcome, Mrs. Euro. And Mrs. Sinclair Delier de Kerke is the President of Makes Mother Matter, an international organization that has been placing mothers at the heart of its mission, advocating for and supporting them as change makers for a better world. Welcome, Mrs. Liedekeke. I will continue the discussion with 3 main questions for them. Please, I would like to remind that you have no more than 10 minutes to answer. Mrs. Kawa, may I ask you, which social protection systems and employment policies could better support women during the pandemic in the different areas like health, care, employment, and education? My question for Dr. Bureau, how can we ensure that policy and decision-making processes related to health include women? And my question to Mrs. Liedekeke, to what extent the COVID-19 is helping to make more visible the problematic of caring and education? Is it helping to position care and education at the center of the government's agenda? Thank you, the 3 of you. Mrs. Kawa, please.
Thank you very much. It is a real pleasure to be here with you today, and thank you for this excellent question. Let me start by saying that the whole globe has been experiencing exceptional circumstances that has taken us, human beings, into uncharted waters. Yet, while we talk about the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, I cannot help but think that there must be a silver lining. Now, how can I be saying this as people's lives are lost and livelihoods continue to be destroyed? The answer is simple. For the longest time, health and social protection issues were not at the forefront of policies. And for once, I am seeing that we are going back to the fundamentals of human development and rights. Right to health care, right for a job, income, right for social protection. So just think of the trillions, not billions, the trillions we now spend to fight the pandemic. It is only a fraction of that what would have taken us to spend on public health and adequate social protection for all. And before the pandemic, think how much we spent to fight the financial crisis that started back in 2008. And it was the fault of the greed of just very few people. During that time, many countries were brought to their knees. Those responsible for the crisis, the bankers, continued with business as usual. So as one looks back at the global financial crisis, we see that the only outcome back then by the international community was that we only started to talk about inclusive economic growth. And this notion then became solidly anchored in the Sustainable Development Goals. Everybody's talked about not only returning to normal, but to a new normal. And I think this is what we are talking about today. Yet despite the talk back then, we ended up, even before the pandemic, in a worse normal situation than before the financial crisis. Health continued to be privatized, the quality continued to be deteriorating, jobs were either flexibilized or abolished, and pensions have been changed from a defined benefit that will impact everybody to defined contributions where a lot of people cannot afford to contribute anymore. So today I see a moment of reckoning, a moment where as a global community, we are discussing the fundamental of any society, lives and livelihoods. Think about it for a moment. The pandemic is bringing us back to basics. We now know that there will be a new normal. And if so, will it be better for everybody? It is an undeniable fact that in any crisis, in fact, in any change, different groups are affected differently. And this crisis will feed on pre-existing conditions and pre-existing inequalities. And this brings us to our topic today of women and gender equality. So let me zoom quickly on the situation of women in the southern and eastern Mediterranean region. What we know is that before the pandemic, there was some advances in the elimination of gender equalities. More women were joining the labor force. Female illiteracy has been practically abolished. Even in some countries, more women go to university than men. And this combination has been associated with lower fertility, improved maternal mortality. We have a bit more women elected to government, even though modestly and not enough. And today, and I think this is the most exciting fact, 1 in 3 startups in the region are either founded or led by Arab women. So as we transform into a new digital economy, we see the non-gendered path of the digital economy. Women are taking actually a lead, and young women in particular. Now, however, despite these advances, women still face impediments across all aspects of their private and public lives, ranging from laws that apply to marriage, the right of children to have the nationality of their mothers, property rights, inheritance rights, reproduction rights, freedom to travel, political representation. And in the workplace, women are still paid less and have a more difficult time in entering the labor market and staying in the labor market. So this still gender divided setting before the pandemic is bound to constrain the strength of which women are able to bounce back into the new normal, no matter what they will do. My hunch is that it will further be compromised. This will be further compromised by the sad economic and political output we all face in the region. Economically, the pandemic is inflicting great pains. Politically, and as a result of the failed Arab Spring, we see a return to populism, failed states, including several democratic regressions, and conflict continues to be unabated in the region. But let's leave the political prospects aside. What antidotes does the region have to spring back after the pandemic and reignite the efforts towards gender equality? I am afraid I cannot find many, although I will try. Economically, even before the pandemic, the region's countries were facing slow economic growth and rising budget deficits that have resulted in increasing indebtedness and very limited fiscal space for national policy making. This has been reflected in slow job creation and reduced social spending, which also meant deteriorating quality of public services. And in this case, we are particularly focused on health. And if and where jobs have been created, they have not been decent and have been paying too little to allow people a decent livelihood. So going back to the title of this session, in terms of what specific policies to better support women. The impact on women have been well documented, and I do not want to dwell on this in my very limited and precious times. What we know is that the situation exacerbated earlier inequalities. For example, women's economic vulnerabilities, care responsibilities, domestic violence are not new, but they have been taken to new levels. Also, statistics may not adequately measure the situation. Consider this. If a man loses his job, he will most likely be registered as unemployed. A woman may simply withdraw from the labor force and have additional burdens of care responsibilities, education of children as a result of the lockdown, and experience reduced access to healthcare or normal treatments. So she will just be withdrawn from the labor market and added with all these responsibilities. As I said, what is needed is to go back to the basics in terms of a human development approach in general and focus on the social sectors while we rebuild the economy. The economy does not come first. So I propose 3 parallel tracks. The first is health comes first. This applies to the whole population. Many countries in the regions do not have universal health care yet. Also, public healthcare systems have been deteriorating in quality, often obligating poor people to seek private sector health support. So this has been in neglected priorities. Now today, governments might tell us that they do not have the fiscal space to have a universal healthcare. But money invested in making sure that people are healthy and therefore active, productive citizens is much cheaper than the huge investments that are now needed to build out an entire economy. A universal healthcare system contributes to promoting equality and inclusion in a structural manner and safeguards us from future risks. Now, this is a long-term objective. A short-term objective is to ensure that women still have access to reproductive health care in the shattered health system that exists, that suffered as a result of the pandemic, I mean. Second, while addressing the short-term impact of the pandemic, we should not lose sight of the longer term. There has been a new normal with more emphasis and increased spendings on social protection to protect the income of those in employment and provide income support to those who are not. And this has been a lot of the rescue packages undertaken by many governments in the regions. This is fundamental as it does not only allow people to survive, but also allows people to spend, and whereby the economy will survive. So we need to continue having incomes. There is also an opportunity for existing social protection mechanisms to address issues related to inclusion, such as informality, where women tend to be concentrated, whether they are home-based workers, whether they are agricultural workers, whether they are domestic workers. We know that women are concentrated in this sector. And social protection systems can use this opportunity to expand the coverage and give incentives to informal workers to register, or by changing legal frameworks to include specific sectors like home-based workers or any other vulnerable sectors. Other issues such as unemployment, maternity, and childcare benefits can also be revisited to tighten up social protection coverage for all vulnerable groups, including women. And third, the progress towards gender equality should not be compromised today. We in the region already have a very long to-do list in achieving gender equality. The pandemic's impact on women should motivate everybody, governments, parliaments, women's national machinery, civil society, international community, everybody, to put all our efforts together in pushing hard towards this objective. We cannot afford to think that this comes later, after the economic recovery. We also cannot afford to work anymore in a segmented manner if we are hoping for any fundamental change. Fundamental change comes when all efforts are working together in tandem and in a synchronized manner. So in conclusion, it is a moment to put lives and livelihoods at the center of the COVID response and ensure that it addresses women's needs and have women present at the table as these policies are developed. Sure, there will be voices that will say, addressing the care economy is not the current policy priority. And we are here to say, no, not this time. This time, the gender equality agenda will stay a priority. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Dr. Bureau, may I ask you to take the floor, please?
Thank you very much. Good morning, and thank you for inviting me to speak here today at this distinguished panel at Women for Mediterranean Conference. I represent the International Council of Nurses, an organization of 135 national nurses associations, and we speak on behalf of 27 million nurses in the world, 7.3 million in Europe, and 1.1 million in the Eastern Mediterranean. It's already been stated here that 70% of the health workforce is female. Nurses comprise 59% of the health professions, and women make up 89% of the nursing workforce in Europe and 78% in the Eastern Mediterranean. So nursing is a profession heavily dominated by women. Nurses are by far the largest group providing direct patient care at the front lines of the pandemic. Many people have become critically ill, hospitalized, put on life support, and over 1 million, more than 1 million, 1.33 million to be exact. Nursing has been critical to survival and to a dignified death. Often, the nurse was the only one at the bedside to care and hold the hand of the dying patient. Around the world, the vast majority of governments were not prepared for this pandemic. Already in January, ICN was in contact with our member association in China, and they communicated to ICN that they were experiencing a critical shortage of personal protective equipment for health personnel. Masks, face shields, gloves, and gowns, and also there was a shortage of ventilators. In country after country, this has been the challenge for nurses and health workers, leaving them unprotected and vulnerable. Lack of preparedness has had a dire impact on those fighting on the front line. Already in January, the ICN began to raise our voice in the media, demanding that governments address the need for PPE for health personnel. ICN brought this directly to the attention of the WHO General Director, Dr. Tedros, and he lifted this issue onto the policy agenda. The ICN also began to monitor the number of nurse infections and deaths. It is estimated that 1 in 10 COVID cases is a health worker. Thousands of nurses and health workers have died, but we don't know the exact number of nurses due to lack of standardized reporting. ICN has documented 1,500 nurse deaths due to COVID, and just last week, 4 Italian nurses lost their lives, 3 to COVID and 1 to suicide. Now, in the second surge of the pandemic, cases, hospitalizations, and deaths are rising once again. Hospitals in many countries are overwhelmed. Although the supply of PPE has improved somewhat, the issue now is the shortage of highly qualified nurses to care for patients. Nurses are being forced to care for more patients, and some are being asked to come to work even though they are sick themselves. Governments in many countries are now deploying military personnel to help staff hospitals and to send patients abroad for care. Although nurses appreciate the spontaneous applause of the public, this is not enough. The pandemic is showing that what we all have known all along, that nurses, a predominantly female profession, are not involved in policy and decision-making processes. So when you ask the question, what can be done to ensure that women are involved in decision-making and policy development, I think we have a long way to go. We can start by raising our voices together. Based on information from our member associations, ICN has developed a call for immediate action, demanding that all of society, from governments to healthcare organizations and businesses, pull together to beat the virus. At ICN, we are saying that a clap isn't enough. We need action. And our 12 main priorities are also a guide for governments and nurses around the world, starting with sufficient, high-quality PPE for nurses and healthcare workers, ensure training and infection prevention and control with particular focus on COVID-19, implement surveillance of systems to track healthcare worker infections, ensure the financial protection and compensation of nurses as healthcare workers, capitalize on nursing leadership, develop and implement a comprehensive COVID-19 public health strategy with active engagement of nurses. And further, ICN calls to demonstrate public support and recognize the value of nurses to society. General Director of the World Health Organization, Dr. Tedros, has led the way here. He has recognized that the goal of universal health coverage cannot be achieved unless nurses are empowered to do what they are educated to do. Under his leadership, the World Health Assembly has declared the year 2020 the year of the nurse and the midwife. WHO initiated development of the first ever State of the World's Nursing Report released earlier this year in April. Now, for the first time, we have facts that show that the world does not have a nursing workforce commensurate with the global health challenges that we face. And just last week, the World Health Assembly mandated development of strategic directions for nursing and midwifery based on this monumental report. Also, the World Health Assembly last week recognized Her Royal Highness Princess Muna Al Hussein of Jordan. She received the General Director's Award for her long-standing work to raise the status of nurses throughout the world. And in her address to the World Health Assembly, she recognized the contribution of nurses and healthcare workers for their courage and relentless fight against COVID-19. She said, applause without action is no longer acceptable. ICN was quick to say that nurses everywhere stand shoulder to shoulder with Her Royal Highness. And I think that champions like Dr. Tedros and Her Royal Highness Princess Muna are very important to raise the status of nurses, one of the largest highly female workforces in the world and in our region. So to sum up, to ensure women are involved in decision-making and policy, we must raise awareness of what we contribute. We need to present our expectations clearly to society. We need to enable nurses, or more broadly, women, document the situation and develop leadership. And we need to inspire to action. We need champions like Dr. Tedros and Her Royal Highness Princess Muna. So thank you for your attention so far.
Thank you very much, Dr. Biur. And now, please, Madam Mrs. Ledekerke, can you please take the floor?
Thank you very much. Thank you for your kind invitation to this very interesting conference. Make Mothers Matter is very honored to be represented in this distinguished panel. Your question was to what extent the COVID-19 is helping to make more visible the problematic of care and education. I would like to address care and education not as a problem, as it is often referred to, a problem, a burden, but as a most necessary resource for our present and our future. It has become a problem, but that's the problem. Care is a necessity. It is a treasure and it is a resource. Care is a necessity. We all need care at certain times in our lives. It's even a matter of survival. Care is a treasure. Caring for each other is not only necessary, it is also one thing that makes us happy. And care is a resource. It's indispensable to support the world's economies. But at the same time, care, and particularly unpaid pair work, we heard the numbers, mostly performed by women, mothers, is not accounted for in GDP and is at the core of gender inequalities. And as it was said before, the pandemic has exacerbated inequalities. I will refer to only some to stick to my point, because when inequalities apply to care and education, a part of the world's population is excluded from their future. And that will have a direct impact on all of us. Who pays the price? The most vulnerable people, it was said in general, but children in particular. Children who will immediately be sent back to work upon the closing of their school and will not go back to school. Girls who will be married and never go back to school. Children victims of abuse and domestic violence, children who don't benefit from their parents' support and reassurance, but on the contrary, are victims of their parents' extreme stress. Children who don't have access to digitalization, and children whose schools don't have the means to reopen under the required safety measures. But women are also paying a high price, women and mothers, because care is costly, and the cost has always been unfairly distributed. Mothers are generally paying an unfair share, and that has been dramatized by the effect of the pandemic. During the confinement, parents had to care for their children while doing their job from home. This has had a superior impact on mothers' employment than on fathers' employment, reinforcing what is rightly called the motherhood pay gap. But paradoxically, one of the very few good news about the pandemic is that it has made more visible how important care and education are. People have actually seen care up front. It has shown men and women, nurses, as he just said now, but also their employers, that care is a responsibility that concerns all of us and cannot be ignored. It is time to talk about care as a collective responsibility. Recently, the UN Secretary General said, and I quote, "The pandemic has shown us what is doing the work, who is doing the work, and that really matters. Nurses, teachers, care workers." As MMM, I would like to add that mothers and fathers have always also been doing the work. And he continues, "As we recover, we need to remember this. It is time to end the inequities of unpaid care work and create new economic models that work for everyone." The pandemic, and that's the second part of your question, is it helping to position care and education at the center of the government's agenda? The pandemic gives all governments the opportunity to realize what really matters and implement measures according to that. That will require courage and imagination, and priorities will have to be made. Care and education have to become priorities. We need care and education-led recovery measures. All policy decisions should be care and education proved. In other words, their implications on care and education must be assessed. Spending on care and education must be seen as investments, not expenses. Allow me to present only 3 suggestions. One about early childhood development, one about gross domestic product, and one about regular people, all of us as drivers for change. Early childhood development, a priority needs to be given to projects and people involved in early childhood development to mitigate not only the short-term, but also the long-term effects of the pandemic. Because when we change the beginning of the story, we change the whole story. And cost-benefit analysis have consistently shown that investing in early childhood development is the most powerful investment a country can make with a sizable impact on economic growth. The GDP, our current economic system fails to recognize the important role of care and education, especially of unpaid care work. Governments need to be creative and move beyond GDP to prioritize care and education for well-being, sustainability, and equity in our economy, using indicators more related to the human well-being. A few countries are members of the Wellbeing Economy Alliance: Scotland, Wales, Iceland, and New Zealand. All of these governments are led by women. The Wellbeing Economy Alliance believes that humanity should determine economics and not the other way around. Currently, the GDP measurement of our economies is being discussed with alternative indicators. MMM joined the Wellbeing Economy Alliance, and we want that the new system that will hopefully replace GDP one day includes care and education, not only as indicators, but as cornerstones. Now, the drivers for change. Who are they? Children, women, men, mothers, fathers, and families. They can all be the driving force for change. The importance of parents must be recognized and family laws enacted and enforced to uphold their rights. We can all be drivers for change. After witnessing the greatest education emergency of our lifetime, campaigns are being launched to protect formal education all over the world. For example, the Save Our Future campaign was created because, and I quote, the COVID-19 pandemic has disrupted education of over 90% of the world's students. It has exacerbated already existing inequalities and magnified the global learning crisis. The future of an entire generation is at risk, but while education is clearly a victim of the pandemic, it is also the solution to long-term recovery. MMM also launched a campaign, the Raise a Pen campaign, to protect the rights to education for women and girls in Afghanistan at a critical time in their country's history. We can all participate because ultimately standing for girls' education in Afghanistan is standing for girls' education everywhere. And we are committed to the right of education, especially for women and girls who are particularly at risk of dropping out of school. It is the key to reducing growing inequalities in these pandemic times and to building a fairer world. Mothers dedicate themselves on a daily basis to ensuring that their children can go to school, providing them with the opportunity to lead a dignified life, realize their dreams, and reach their full potential. We also know that educated mothers have healthier and more educated children. You will find about these campaigns on the video gallery and the dedicated platform here for the conference. Look around you, check for these campaigns and others, participate. Building Back Better is the responsibility of all governments, but it is also our collective and individual responsibility to care. Another positive effect of the pandemic is that in some families, parents and children have actually really enjoyed spending more time together. Creativity and imagination will be needed to build back better and pursue the common good. Caring for each other will make a difference, and particularly caring for children, because their future is in our hands, but our future is in their hands. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you very much to all of you. We kindly apologize as Madame Fatma Sedin has another meeting to attend, but you can contact her and send your questions through the platform and the app. So again, thank you all for your valuable insights and contributions. I think we all agree in a human-centered agenda for the future. We have had many questions and ideas flowing during this session and inspiring fruitful thoughts. And I will now, as promised, to open the space for a virtual audience and within the different social media platforms and allow questions for all four panelists. I would like now to introduce you to Kate Williams. Hello, Kate.
Hello.
She's our online content moderator. Thank you for helping us. Kate, please, can you kindly share the questions and ideas of the virtual audience with our panelists?
Certainly. So we've had a question for Haifa Al-Kailani asking, how can international and national media promote the role of women in health crisis management? We have also two questions for Mary Kawa. The first question is, do women and men have the same financial incentives during the pandemic as they are working on the front line? The other question comes from the UNDP asking what kind of incentives might encourage informal workers to register, given the current bureaucratic and tax implications of doing so for fragile workers. We also have two questions for Anne-Claire de Liedekerk. The first question is, how can we ensure through policies a balance in the shared responsibility of care work? And the second question is, do you believe that the chances of success in getting more recognition of women in decision-making processes will be better in countries with less male-dominated cultures? And the last question that we have come in for Karen Borjo is, how can we ensure data reflects the imbalance in the health sector and senior positions across the Mediterranean region? And after that, we have some activity on the social media, but perhaps you would like to let the speakers respond first, Path.
Well, yes, because we have many questions, and I remember our panelists that we have just 3 minutes per question. I don't know who would like to begin. Maybe Mrs. Al-Kailani, will you like? Thank you so much.
Thank you. The role of the media is extremely important in addressing women's issues and in highlighting really not only women's challenges, but also women's successes. In the coverage that we have been reading, all of us, the last 6-7 months, especially pertaining to COVID and the role of women in COVID, we have seen very good coverage and very really telling the good stories of women working at the forefront in the fight against COVID. Women nurses, women doctors, women leaders, government leaders, women presidents. The media went out really to put these good, successful stories and to highlight them. And this is very important because this encourages others to keep giving and to keep sacrificing when they know that they are recognized. But importantly also, it shows what a difference a woman's role and participation can make when they are given the authority and they're given the leverage to impact and to give their input in meeting such a major crisis. During this crisis, this summer, I just want to give an example of the local media and international media, how they also stepped up to cover women, and not only in the fight against COVID, but women in Lebanon, how they stepped up when the terrible Beirut port blast took place on the 4th of August, and how women and the NGOs formed by women stepped in to help the injured, to help in rebuilding the communities that were affected. There were stories in the media every day about women NGOs and how they were working to set up soup kitchens, deliver medical aid, attend to coronavirus matters, but also above all to people who were suffering from an unbelievable tragedy that Lebanon and its people suffered. So no, I truly believe that the media is there to tell a good story, to support, to really inspire also, and above all to acknowledge. It's important to acknowledge what's being done and put it out in the international community. Thank you.
I would be happy to answer to, sorry.
Oh, sorry, I was giving but would you like to answer, Mrs. Lidekek, the question on policies balancing the shared responsibility of care work?
Exactly. How can we ensure through policies a balance in the shared responsibility of care work? I will talk about two measures, one at the very beginning and one later. Usually before the child comes, there aren't so many care problems, as we said before. So I think that encouraging a leave for fathers at the birth of the child is very important, and also including fathers in the parental leave. The second measure, to me, that's crucial, is to ensure the possibility for the caring parent who took some leave for work, how long it could be, and for if it's a part-time or full-time leave, but for the parents who took the care responsibility to be able to go back to work with the competencies that were acquired during that leave, to be included in the overall competencies, because we are always struck by the fact that when you take care of your own children, you don't work, which doesn't make sense, because if you take care of someone else's children and you are paid for it, you work. If you take care of your own children and you're not paid for it, you don't work, and you cannot use that for your re-entry in the labor market. We regret that, and we think we should think out of the box and find ways for the caring parent to be able to come in and out the labor market depending on his or her specific priorities at the time. So that would be two measures among many others that I would like to enhance. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Lidekek. Please, now, Mrs. Kawar, would you like to take the floor?
Yes. I believe I had two questions. The first, if I understand correctly, was regarding the financial incentives for women and men in the post-COVID situations. I'm not very clear on the specific questions, but I would like to tell you what I know most about, which is what was the government's packages regarding workers and enterprises in Jordan, where I am based, and what are the gender differentials in this support that was given. So the government provided enterprises, small enterprises, with support so that they can survive and not lay off workers. And they also provided concessional loans for large enterprises to do the same. And also they provided a few months wages for what is called daily wage workers in Jordan, which is basically the informal economy workers. Now, where was the problem with this? It was a very well-intended program to support income for workers and to support enterprises to survive. But it was gender differentiated. One, the loans, the concessional loans for large enterprises were mostly owned by men. The daily wage workers, you could get your support by your family ID. And we know that the head of household ID in Jordan, it's most predominantly the man. So if you are a daughter or a wife, your family book will not reflect this and you will not get the income. So that is one way where the lack of participation of women in developing the response package resulted in having more incentives for men than women. Another thing, because of the lack of participation of women, all daycare centers were categorically closed, even for essential workers. Now, a lot of women lost their jobs, and so a loss of income, and a lot of the working women had to consider leaving their jobs because where would they leave their children in a lockdown situation? So that was another area where the lack of equal participation of men and women in policymaking resulted in differential impact on men and women. The second question is a very important question also on the informal economy. And I tell you, I think this has been taking the thoughts of development practitioners for a long time. We have been always discussing, okay, so how can we encourage the transition of informal workers and enterprises on the informal economy? It's really the million-dollar question. But in a time when we have a crisis, what can be done is that incentives can be provided for workers to register where fees for the first year, as an example, are waived. I mean, the governments are spending a lot of money on social protection, aren't they? And isn't this a priority area of work? And wouldn't this provide us with future formalization of the economy? And the background should not be about taxes. The background should be what will the government, what kind of services the government will provide for these workers to encourage them to participate. Will they have access to training? Will they have access to tax cuts? Will they have access to contracts in the formal economy or contracts in the government bidding structure? How can we work on the incentives to demonstrate to informal economy workers that this is a win-win situation, and actually to finally build a trust between the informal economy worker and the government? Because at the end, this is the heart of the matter, where the government looks at these as, okay, this is an area for tax levies, while informal economy workers say, okay, well, what are we getting from the government? Why should we register? So it's an opportunity today, especially as governments are looking for expanding social protection projects. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mrs. Kawa. Dr. Bioro, would you like to respond to the data question on the health sector?
Yes, thank you very much. I would like to respond to that question, because I think that we do need data, and I think that in my first presentation, I referred to the State of the World's Nursing report that does document very well the lack of senior positions for nurses in government. And this is really a serious issue, because the nursing workforce, being the largest workforce in health, it's very vital that this valuable resource to society is well documented and well represented with good leadership all through the line of leadership. And one of the critical positions of to represent nursing is the Chief Government Nursing Officer. And in the State of the World's Nursing report, we can see that in the Eastern Mediterranean, only 54% of countries responding to the data, sending in data, actually do have a Chief Nursing Officer position in the central government. Well, that's a very low number, of course. And in the European region, 86% do have this position. But the question then, of course, is, are they empowered really to do the work of the Chief Nursing Officer to improve the role of nursing in government? And we know that when there is a Chief Nursing Officer and a nursing leadership program, that this has a very important impact on how on the deployment of the nursing workforce. That's quite critical, especially in an emergency situation, as we've been faced with now during the pandemic. So data is absolutely critical to show the imbalance. And now that we have that data, we need to move forward and use that data to improve the situation. We have been working very systematically to make sure that the WHO Regional Office for the Mediterranean, Eastern Mediterranean region and the WHO region do have a Chief Nursing and Midwifery Officer at the regional office in these two very important offices within WHO. So far, we don't have that in place, but we're still working on this and having an impact to get those positions in place. And of course, this will be a very important signal to the national governments of the Mediterranean region and the European region to put in place these critical positions. So we have to start somewhere, and this is one of the major asks or demands that the profession has at the present time. Data is critical. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much, Dr. Karen. I invite Kate. Kate, we are running out of time, but could you give us 30 seconds on what is going on social media, on Twitter, on Facebook and Instagram? Can you summarize this for us?
Yes, certainly. So there's a lot of talk about the figure that we had earlier in the polls of the 25% women's leadership in healthcare. Rupa Dutt, who is the moderator in this afternoon's World Health Organization panel, has posted about that. She's also saying that we can't afford to go back to business as usual and it's time for a change. There's talk about the need to build back better. Women in Global Health has been posting very actively about the different speakers in this afternoon's World Health Organization session. And the need to build back better, and that we need to think about how we move forward. Mary Kawa has also posted this morning asking how the pandemic has affected women in terms of social care, protection and job and responsibilities. And Helena Dali, the EU Commission for Equality, posted using the hashtag Gender Equal Strategy. And the Gender Equal Strategy aims to ensure a gender equal EU and Euro-Mediterranean region with measures to prevent and combat gender-based violence and to address gender inequality on the labour market, including the gender pay gap.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you
very much, Kath.
Thank you, Kate. So now we are in the final session, and I would like to invite our panelists to close this session by challenging all to summarize in, let's say it was 2 minutes, let's try 1 minute now, the most important ideas that we shared during the panel today as a way to conclude the plenary session on women on the front line of the COVID-19. So please, Mrs. Al-Kaliani, would you like?
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, I would like to share that for me, our discussion and the crisis has highlighted the importance of collaboration between all stakeholders and at all levels in order to manage the pandemic and in order to build back better. And I wish to add that we need to keep this conversation going and keep coming together as we are today to initiate vital dialogue and facilitate meaningful connections that will power new projects, new strategies, initiatives, and ideas to navigate the challenges of the Mediterranean region and beyond, and meet the urgent need to empower women's engagement, inclusion, and successful leadership and full participation in the management of COVID and recovery. This is absolutely vital, not only for our future well-being, but for the future prosperity and stability of the Mediterranean region. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Mrs. Ledekerk.
I would like to conclude just one thing that everybody said, that yes, women make the difference, and not only because they are mothers, because that's what we are working with, but because their outlook on the world and the way they practice their job, the fact that they are entrepreneurs, they take on responsibility, that makes a difference. We need to make sure that girls are educated so women can take their place in the world, and trust that involving women is key to sustainable peace, key to sustainable development, and that governments and population and have an advantage in really including women in all areas of life. So thank you really for this conference. That was a step in that direction. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Kawa, would you like to?
Yes, thank you. My concluding remark would be, now as countries across the world, and perhaps most specifically in the southern and eastern Mediterranean, consider and move from the rescue to the recovery phases of this crisis, it is becoming clear that we must not only build better, but also reimagine our economies and societies, using this moment as an opportunity to go back to the fundamentals of lives and the fundamentals of livelihoods. And within these fundamentals is the gender equality is a main agenda. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Bioro.
Thank you very much. Nurses are committed to patients and to carry out their work. They need to have the support and backing of their leadership and government. Nurses have begun to say, if you don't have a seat at the table, bring your own chair. And I think that should be a model for women in general. We need to raise our voices to make sure that we have an impact on the policies and on governments everywhere. And I think that in order for that to happen, we should be lifting the situation together. And I think that this conference can be a very important step in that direction so that we can continue to work together to raise the voice of women and health workers everywhere. So thank you very much for this very exciting conversation and for this very exciting conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, all of you. I would like to say that we will not achieve the SDGs or have a human-centered agenda if we do not develop a transformative gender agenda placing women at the same decision level as men. So thank you all. I would like now to conclude. I remind you that we will continue the Women's Conference this afternoon at 2 p.m. with the side event Building Back Better through a gender equitable leadership in the global health workforce in collaboration with the World Health Organization. I would like to welcome you all again and ask you to please participate and share your valuable ideas and comments to this interactive dialogue through our different platforms, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, and use our hashtag #WomenForMediterranean. Please participate. Thank you all for your attendance. Be responsible, stay safe and healthy. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you
for hosting us.
you.
Bye.
Thank
Good
you
luck
very
in
much.
the rest of the
Bye
conference.
for now.
Bye-bye.